Alrighty, folks. Rock cycle. Uh, excuse me. So, what we're going to talk about today is how not only rocks are made, but how they are all related to one another. This is something undoubtedly you've heard before. I'm not even sure if I'm going to put a new twist on it. Okay, but do bear with us, and I certainly, there's a few slides at the end that probably aren't part of your typical rock cycle conversation, at the very least. Hopefully those will help. I just had a conversation with my daughter last week. 7th grade science, they're doing rock cycle. I'm sure you guys did it again whenever you had earth science. So like I said, I realize you guys have this down, but just pretend like you forgot a little bit for the next half hour, so we'll see. All right. So, can't go very far without having definition of a rock. You had definition of a mineral on a previous test, and on this upcoming test, the rock unit test, you will have the definition of a rock. Every so often, these fall on the same test, minerals and rocks. And as such, I made a point of tweaking this definition a little bit so it didn't sound so similar as the definition of a mineral. My thought being, it might confuse you guys if you had two very similar definitions. So, for example, I changed what is typically naturally occurring to naturally formed. Okay, that's one of the biggest changes. You already remembered naturally occurring as the beginning to minerals. We're on a separate test. Please feel free to say naturally occurring to start it off. Okay. I am kind of strict about what I accept for these two definitions, minerals and rocks, but that's fine. Natural is the important part, not the occurring or the forming. Right? So naturally occurring, inorganic, asterisk this time, or organic. There are some organic rocks. A consolidated aggregate. All right. What does consolidate mean? Yeah. Guy out in the class is moving things together with his hands. Yeah, it means bring together. All right. Consolidate, to pull things in nice and close, to condense. There's a handful of synonyms you could possibly come up with. Aggregate. What's an aggregate, you guys? Aggregate. An aggregate is a whole bunch of things. You could say you have an aggregate of friends. You probably wouldn't, but you could. All right, it's a whole bunch of things. So, a naturally occurring, inorganic or organic, whole bunch of stuff that's brought together. Well, we need this last bullet to kind of tell us what that whole bunch of stuff is. Grains of minerals and or organic material. Almost always it's an and. Almost always. But we throw that or in there. We like to pretend that one of the specimens you'll see is called peat. It's a sedimentary rock. And we tell you that peat is old plant material. All right. And you guys will call it organic and all this stuff. But to assume that there's absolutely no mud, dust, silt, whatever in that vegetative material is probably quite silly. All right. But we like to pretend. This has a rather nice sentence as well down at the bottom for you sentence rememberers. Naturally occurring consolidated aggregate of organic material and or inorganic mineral grains and rock fragments. Again, however you wish to remember this one. You folks on campus, you will be writing it on your sheet. Down at the bottom is the last question. You folks on campus, online, you'll be typing it into a little definition box. I don't think I actually had you online folks type the definition of a mineral. You will be typing the rock one, though. Depends on the semester. Sometimes I leave the multiple choice question in there. But regardless, plan on learning this for the test. Naturally occurring inorganic or organic consolidated aggregate of one or more mineral grains and organic material or organic material. Not all rocks have organic material in them. Igneous rocks, for example, that form from lava or magma. There's nothing organic in them at all. All right. Sedimentary rocks, that's where you get your organic. So please don't misconstrue this, that all rocks have organic material in them. I just rattled off a couple names. Here is the official list of the 3 rock types: igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic. Igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic. And I abbreviate these, you'll see in emails, you'll see in even on papers and write-ups, Ig, Sed, and Met, okay? And an RX for rocks. I do that a lot too when I'm writing. I know that means prescription, right? But it's also shorthand for rocks. So Ig RX, Sed RX, Met RX. You get tired of writing those over time. So what is an igneous rock? Well, an igneous rock is a rock that forms out of cooling lava or magma. What's the difference between lava and magma? We'll get there soon enough. All right. They're more or less the same thing. We use a different word when it's at the surface than when it's inside the earth. So, igneous rocks can form at the surface of the earth, or they can also form inside the earth. And we just want to take a moment to introduce the idea that these igneous rocks, as they cool from lava or magma, crystals are growing. All right, crystals are growing. In lab, we already looked at igneous rocks, many of you. Or if you're at home, you guys will still be looking at igneous rocks, perhaps. One of the big things we talk about is crystal size. Okay, big crystals, little crystals, no crystals. So igneous rocks is all about crystals. Sedimentary rocks. Sedimentary rocks are kind of the chicken McNuggets of the rock world. All right, they're pieces, parts of pre-existing things that are lying around at the surface of the earth that are brought together and presented to you as a new rock. Okay, really makes you want to go have a chicken nugget, doesn't it? But that's really a great example. Except with a chicken nugget, of course, it is all chicken. With a sedimentary rock, it could be igneous rocks, metamorphic rock, pieces of other sedimentary rocks, all kinds of stuff brought in with it. It can even be twigs and stuff. All right, so it's literally anything. Which makes sedimentary rocks both the most fun or interesting and also kind of difficult because there are certain things you have to look at to classify them. We also need to remember, and you'll hear a lot about this when we get to Sed Rocks I just said Sed Rocks. When we get to Sed Rocks in lecture, that it's not just those broken down bits and pieces of sand and silt that's blown around in the wind. Also, sediments can grow or form in water. Okay, limestone is one of the biggest sedimentary rocks out there. It isn't made out there blown around in the dust and the wind. It's made at the bottom of the ocean. Okay, and its crystals grow out of the salt water, but they call that sediment as well. So don't worry about it now. This is an introduction to, 3, 4, 5. This is an introduction to 5 PowerPoints. So, just very superficial kind of discussion right now. Metamorphicals. Metamorphic rocks are rocks that were brought down deep inside the earth, at which point they could then be exposed to extremely high temperatures and extremely high pressures. And it's under those conditions that changes take place in the rock that make it a new and different rock. Sometimes more different than others. This definitely does not happen at the surface. So we have a lab for each of these three types of rocks. We have, as I said, at least a lecture for each of these. Igneous brings in volcanoes. So there's a second lecture for igneous. Sedimentary rocks brings in weathering and erosion and a stratigraphy lesson, which talks about how the rocks pile up and kind of some of the neat stuff we can do with that. So there's two extra right there. And then metamorphic we give like 20 minutes to. There's not a whole lot to talk about at this level with metamorphic rocks, which is kind of nice by the time because you guys are done with rocks by then, mentally and physically. So wasn't this supposed to be about the rock cycle? It sure was. So let's get there. All right. As I said in the introduction, we're going to explain not just how rocks are formed, but how all these rocks are related to one another. We're going to show you origins, processes. We're going to show you that Mother Nature was the first recycler. It is natural to recycle. Now, when I switch the slide here in a moment, please don't just rapidly copy this down. We're going to build it from scratch, and there's some changes that I'm going to make. For the longest time, I kept saying, boy, I really need to hit this slide with the digital version of whiteout. And you know what? I've just kind of left it as a teaching moment kind of thing, and we walk through it. So please, only draw what we talk about as we talk about it. That being said, I'd like you to take about half a sheet of one of your paper, leave yourself plenty of room. And what I want you to draw are these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rectangles. You don't even need to make them 3D. If you want to, feel free. Don't put any words in them. Just 5 rectangles. And I'm going to use the clock analogy. So we want one at 11 o'clock, one at 1 o'clock, one at 3, and one at 9, and then one at 6. So these two kind of like we even them out a little bit. Magma comes up a little bit. So 11 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and 6 o'clock. 5 rectangles. Beautiful. Going to assume you could have drawn 5 rectangles by now. It's a circle. It's a cycle. There is no beginning. There is no end, but there is a logical place to start. And that logical place, you'll see why in the end, happens to be where the word magma is. I want you guys to put the word lava in there as well, though. Okay, just to remind yourself, we can start this process with magma or lava. So magma or lava in your 9 o'clock block. And you could write the word igneous rock in your 11 o'clock block. And draw that little arrow, but do not write the word solidification. Do not. But somebody please tell me, what does solidification mean? You there in the blue sweatshirt, light blue sweatshirt, solidification.
Something becomes solid.
Yeah, is that helpful? No, it's a rock. Of course it's solid, right? That's really just not a helpful word. Anyone remember what we said has to happen to the magma or lava for it to become an igneous rock? We used one very special, helpful word a couple minutes ago. Magma or lava must cool and crystallize. Yeah. Instead of solidification, let's write crystallization. And I don't care how you spell it. I probably can't spell it right either. All right, crystallization. That word actually tells us what's going on. So magma or lava crystallizes into igneous rock. If we were getting greedy, we could have written the word cools and crystallizes in there too, but that's perhaps a bit much for a little arrow like that. Now, from igneous rock, we move on to the word sediment. Feel free to write sediment. And you can even draw the arrow in there and write the words weathering and erosion in there. We need someone to remind us what those two words mean, though, because it has been perhaps a long time since you've heard weathering and erosion. And a lot of folks come in here thinking that they're essentially mean the same thing. So we want to stop before we even get to sedimentary rocks and fix that a little bit. Somebody tell me just one of them, weathering or erosion. Tell me what it means. You there in the ski hat. Pick one.
Weathering is like rocks are broken down by outside factors like rain.
Okay. All right. Weathering is the breakdown of rocks. We could keep it that simple right now. All right. So weathering is the breakdown of rocks. Write that down. Good one. Who can tell us what erosion is then? Otherwise, the fickle finger of fate will pick someone. If weathering is the breakdown, what is erosion? Huh? Wearing away. See, and that's what you guys come up the hill thinking. I don't know about other schools. I hear it there. But somebody at Proctor keeps saying wearing away. And actually, it's not even Proctor. It is everywhere on the planet. They say wearing away. Here's the problem with that definition. You gave me exactly what I wanted thinking. Wearing is the weathering. Wearing is breaking down. The away is the part that we want. And somewhere along the lines, that got blended. Wearing away. So the away, if the away is what we want, erosion must mean movement. So if weathering is breaking down of rocks, whatever we said a moment ago, erosion is the transportation of that broken down material. That's all. Again, we could keep it super simple right now. So wearing away is perfect for saying weathering and erosion, but somehow it ended up being the definition of erosion itself. So when we break down rocks, what are we actually making? We're making sediment. When we transport that broken down material, we're transporting sediment. So weathering produces sediment. Erosion is the transportation of sediment. Wonderful. All right. We're going to draw another arrow, but we're not writing that word. And then we're going to write the word sedimentary rock as well. But don't write lithification. Anyone know what a monolith is? It's like a big hunk of rock, usually. That's what a monolith is. Lith means rock. All right? I'm not sure what it means in lithograph. Written with a rock, maybe? I'm not sure. So So in this case, lithification means turns to rock. Well, again, duh, and not horribly helpful. It's as great as solidify. Lithify. We actually talked about lithification of all of these rocks. How do we make an igneous rock? We crystallize. How do we make a sedimentary rock? We're in the middle of telling you that. How do you make a metamorphic rock? We already remember that that's high temperatures and pressures, right? So lithification, it just means making a rock. We will have 3 types of lithification here. So out the window with that. What I want you to write instead is compaction and cementation. Compaction and cementation. Squeeze them and glue them. Squeeze, compaction, cementation, cement. Squeeze them and glue them. So we have to take those sediments, we need to compact them, and we need to glue them together, and then it's a sedimentary rock. All right? You'll learn how that happens when we get there. And as I indicated a little while ago, that's a lot of sedimentary rocks, but there's also those weird ones that form underwater. Different story. But this works for the majority of them. So weathering and erosion breaks down, transports sediment, leaves you a pile of sediment. That sediment gets compacted and glued together and turned into a sedimentary rock. All right? Now, that sedimentary rock gets turned into a metamorphic rock. How do we do that? Metamorphism. Wow, that's helpful. All right, somebody remind us what metamorphism is. Exposure to what and what? High temperatures and high pressure, yeah. And I gave you some abbreviations earlier. Up arrow T and up arrow P is, write high temperature and pressure the first time or two, but feel free to abbreviate high T and high P. Okay. And where do we do this? At the surface or deep inside the earth? Deep inside the earth, right? So, if I ever do get around to annotating this, which I probably won't, I would add one thing. I would add a dashed line or some sort of line, splits igneous rocks in half, and comes right down here through the center, right through in between sedimentary rock and metamorphic rock. And what that line would represent is the top half, everything up here, would be surface processes. And everything below that would be inside the earth, subsurface. Why would I draw it right through the middle of igneous rock? Because remember, we've got magma or lava. Lava's at the surface, magma's what we call it inside. So igneous rocks could form inside or at the surface. Weathering and erosion has to happen at the surface. This squeezing and gluing happens more or less at the surface. We call it the surface. Even if it's, 10, 20 feet down. That's not inside the earth. Bottom of the ocean is still the surface of the earth, for reference. It just happens to be covered with a really big puddle. All right, but this stuff, this is all deep, deep inside the earth. All right, so we get metamorphic rocks, pretty straightforward, squeezing and gluing. No, that was sedimentary. High temperatures and high pressures, squeezing and heating. All right, to go from metamorphic rock back to magma. And this is why they only wrote the word magma here, because you're not going to go metamorphic to lava. I get what they said, but for teaching purposes, we just threw that lava in there. Metamorphic rock to magma. They have the word partial melting here. I'd like you to write remelt instead. So the idea here is that if you expose a rock to just a little bit of heat and pressure, you will change it. And in fact, you'll hear me say when we talk about metamorphic rocks, I'll have you imagine a water balloon, okay? And we've all had a water balloon in our hand. You've got that huge amount of water, just that tiny little film or skin on the outside. And that's where I like to picture these metamorphic rocks at the very end of what they can tolerate before they just turn back into a puddle, right? And at which point, you're back to magma and you've completed the rock cycle. Now, this sounds like a lot to remember. It can also be spoken as sentences. All right? And I've kind of done this a little bit, but I'll do it all at once now. Lava or magma crystallizes into igneous rock. When that igneous rock makes it to the surface, it's exposed to weathering and erosion, which breaks it down into something we call sediment. That sediment could get compacted and cemented and turned into something called sedimentary rock. If we bring that sedimentary rock back inside the earth and expose it to high temperatures and pressures, it'll become a metamorphic rock. If that metamorphic rock is in there too long or goes too deep, it will turn back into magma. It's really rather straightforward, right? Just a lot of steps. So think about that. And a lot of times diagrams, diagrams aren't meant to simplify things. That is the point of them. Convey some information in a quick, glancing format. But if you don't know what some of the words in the diagram mean, if you don't know, where they came from or what they represented, it can be more confusing than it was meant to be. So sometimes sentences are a great way to think about it. So I encourage you to try that at some point when you're studying. So we're not going to worry about this rock and mantle at all. And this little arrow here, we're going to just ignore that. That's just a reminder that there's always plenty of magma down inside the earth. We don't need to keep melting metamorphic rocks to make more rocks. All right. That's all that's there for, and that's very true, but not something we want to focus on right now. However, this other pile of spaghetti noodles in here, these arrows going all over the place, those also have some significance, and we want to spend just a moment. So this is what I call the outer loop, what we've just been talking about. All right? But not all igneous rock gets brought to the surface of the earth and broken down into sediment. If that were true, we'd have none in the lab room, for just one example. But also, some igneous rock never makes it to the surface. It just gets sucked back down further in and turned into a metamorphic rock? No. It gets exposed to the processes. And this is where, again, I'd like you to alter your arrows. I want you to draw this arrow from igneous rock to the process. Because remember, it's the process that leads us to the product. Perhaps a better example, slightly less confusion. Metamorphic rock down here, all right? Not all metamorphic rocks remelt into magma or lava, right? Why not? Well, otherwise we wouldn't have any in lab to look at, of course. But some of them make their way to the surface, believe it or not, at which point they're exposed to weathering and erosion. That weathering and erosion breaks them down into sediment. So this arrow should go to the word, the process. So what you start to see here is that another way to help you, this is going to be a diagram, matching diagram on the test. Arrows are processes. Squares are products. Okay? Squares are nouns, however you want to say it. Objects. The arrows are the processes. And then, potentially the shortest arrow over here, it's not very exciting to be a sedimentary rock, okay? Most you get to do is roll down a hill or maybe travel along in a stream or roll back and forth in an ocean. Majority of sedimentary rocks sit at the surface, get broken down, turned back into sediment, get squeezed and glued back into sedimentary rock, where they sit at the surface, get broken down, turned into sediment, get squeezed and glued. But again, please make sure this arrow goes to the process, weathering and erosion, not the product, sediment. We just want to take that extra step to burn this into your brain, how we get these products. So that's the rock cycle. As I said, it's pretty straightforward, but also potentially a handful of steps to get into your brain. Any questions about it before we move on? And again, I know you've seen it at least 2 times so far in life, so kind of like scientific method. Just hear it over and over again. Okay. So, like I said, I added some stuff at the end here, just stuff that comes up later in the semester dealing with rocks and just some general rock information. We don't just have geologists in America or in England. We have geologists all over the planet. And as such, they speak a variety of languages. And nowadays, that isn't such a big deal as it used to be. So they had to worry about stuff like, understanding each other's papers and understanding each other's maps and stuff like that. So one of the things they did early on was develop a set of symbols for rock types when you're drawing maps or making illustrations or diagrams. And you're going to learn some of these. You're not going to learn all of these. We learn like 3. Okay. But they're very, very common. And when we get to the groundwater chapter, we draw with them. We use them. Because groundwater depends a lot on what kind of rocks you've got down there, and then so on and so forth. So, a lot of these words you know just reading them. Some of them you haven't heard of yet, or you've vaguely heard of. Many of them you'll learn when we get to the Sedimentary Rocks chapter. That's the other thing you'll notice, is that the majority of the rock symbols are for sedimentary rocks. There are some igneous ones out there, but a lot of times, I don't even have a percentage for you. People are mapping what's at the surface, and surface tends to be sedimentary. Anywho, there's my wonderful art skills. So we have 4, actually. I lied, not 3, that you need to remember. The bricks. Okay. When I was a kid, we drew bricks a lot, and then we kind of like faux spray painted the word Pink Floyd on it. But nowadays, they're old. Nobody knows them. So we're just going to have a wall with bricks. The bricks represent limestone. Bricks equal limestone. The dots. And I know some of those dots are bigger than others. That's okay. It wasn't on purpose, but it does happen in nature. The dots represent grains of sand, so that is a layer of sandstone. The dashes. The dashes are shale. If you guys need any help spelling these words, let me know. I think you got them, though. Shale. And then last but not least, we've got these little asterisks or stars or whatever you want to make them. Those were my attempt at an asterisk. That's supposed to be crystals. That is just generic igneous rock. Again, do they have a symbol for granite versus basalt? They sure do. We will never need it. So there's also just a generic igneous rock. So limestone, sandstone, shale, the big 3. Okay, you see these all over the place. Very common, very useful symbols to know. And igneous rock, because every so often it butts its head in there. It says, hey, don't forget about me. So rock symbols. I added some pictures in here so you could see maybe kind of where we get these symbols from. This is diagonal. I apologize, but it was the only way I could get it to be nice and big and still show you the brick-like nature. So you see kind of how we have some little brick shapes in there. They're much more irregular than we drew them, but limestone often breaks into blocks. Just like that. Shale. You probably already know what shale is. Shale is very, very, very thin layers of rocks. It's usually quite brittle and fragile. It breaks apart into even smaller pieces, but we see that very fine layering, and that's what we're trying to imply by the dashed lines. Sandstone, of course, the grains of sand. And for whatever reason, I don't have a picture of Igneous Rock in here, but excuse me. Pretty sure this is not the Little Falls exit. I really, really wanted a picture of the Little Falls exit. I can't remember if I went and got one myself to use after Googling for it. This is a road cut. We call rocks exposed at the side of a road cut, because often they had to cut into them, or sometimes it's just a cross section. You know, it was already there, perhaps a stream many, many moons ago cut through there, whatever what. So you see these rocks along the side of the road. We often call them road cuts. This is a very common sequence of shales and limestone. Okay, when we get to that chapter, you'll learn why shale and limestone sequences are so very common. This is something you've seen 100 times, possibly not paid an ounce of attention to. Maybe now you'll look a little better. The shale is the dark black stuff, and the limestone is the lighter colored, creamier stuff in here. Not exactly doing the blocky thing, but very, very common. Oh, and that's the last picture. And by the time we're done with this unit, you'll know why that forms and what it represents. Anybody know what it represents right now? Okay. All right. So that is the rock cycle.